Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Ustad Abdurrahman Iker with Iker Education and Coaching, and today we are going to be learning about Tajweed. The word Tajweed means to make something excellent. And when we talk about Tajweed, as we're talking about Quran, we're talking about reciting the Quran in an excellent way, meaning reciting the Quran the way that it was revealed. Now, there's a lot of rules that are called Tajweed rules to recite the Quran the way that it was revealed. And it can seem intimidating, it can seem hard, but our goal is to make it simple. So today we're going to be talking about the rules of Nun As-Sakinah and Tanween, which is a big part of the Tajweed rules that you'll see in the Quran. I'm going to be using two resources here. The first resource is the resource that is on my right here. And what this source is this is the Qa'idatul Baghdadiyya book, Muallim edition, the 2019 edition. And then on the left side is a nice diagram that we have to simplify the rules of Nun As-Sakinah and Tanween. The reason they are called the rules of Nun As-Sakinah and Tanween, because they're simply rules or steps that we follow whenever we see a Nun As-Sakinah or a Tanween. Now, first of all, a Nun As-Sakinah is simply a Nun with a sukoon on it. Now, sukoon, remember, it can look like a circle. I'm going to turn on my mouse here. It can look like a circle, but it can also look like a sideways V, which is how it looks in the Quran. This is the one I want you to remember. Now, sometimes you'll be able to see it, and sometimes you won't be able to see it. But remember, whenever we have a letter that doesn't have anything on it, we can assume almost all the time that it has a sukoon on it. So again, a Nun As-Sakinah is a Nun that either doesn't have anything on it or that has a sukoon on it. And if it doesn't have anything on it, we assume that it does have a sukoon on it. Now that we know what a Nun As-Sakinah is, Tanween just means fathatain, kasratain, and dhammatain. Now you might be wondering, well, what does a Tanween have to do with a Nun As-Sakinah? Well, both of them, what they have in common is that they have a Nun sound in them. For example, fathatain, whenever we have like an, in, un, ben, bin, bun, listen to the sound that you hear at the end. You hear a Nun sound at the end. An, in, un, ben, bin, bun. And of course, with a Nun As-Sakinah, a Nun with a sukoon on it, you're also going to hear a Nun sound. So that's what they have in common. Now, we're going to have a rule depending on what comes after that Nun As-Sakinah or Tanween. So again, almost all the time when we have a Nun As-Sakinah or Tanween, we're going to have a rule that we follow. That rule depends on the next letter after the Nun As-Sakinah or Tanween. Now, if the next letter is one of these letters, Hamza, Ha, Ain, Ha, Ghain, Kha, which are all the letters that come from the throat, then the rule that we're going to follow is called Al-Idhar. Al-Idhar. And the steps that we're going to follow are super simple for Al-Idhar. It's the easiest rule. Really, what we're doing with Al-Idhar is that we're making it clear. We're just reading it the way we already know how to read it. You're reading it without holding anything. You're reading it just the way that it looks. So let's do a couple of examples of that right here. We're just going to do two examples. Now, again, whenever we have a Nun As-Sakinah or a Tanween, followed by one of these letters, Hamza, Ha, Ain, Ha, Ghain, Kha, these are the steps we're going to follow. Here we have a Nun As-Sakinah, and we have a Ha after it. So, ding, we have al-idhar, right? What does that mean? We make it clear. So we're just going to read this the way it looks. Anharon. Just read it the way it looks. You don't hold anything. You don't do anything special. Again, it's the easiest rule. We're going to do an example with Tanween now. Here we have ahadan abadan. You don't hold anything. We just read it the way it looks. Easiest rule. All right. Now, the second rule is the hardest rule. The second rule is called al-idgham. There's al-idgham with ghunna, and there's al-idgham without the ghunna. Ghunna is when you hold a nasal sound, a sound with your nose, like when you hold that, and you hold it for 2 counts, like this, 1, 2. So that's what a ghunna is. Now, there's 2 types of al-idgham, as we said. The type of idgham depends on the letter that you see after the Nun As-Sakinah or Tanween. If you see a ya, a nun, a mim, or a waw after a Nun As-Sakinah or a Tanween, then it's going to be al-idgham with ghunna. Then we're going to follow these 3 steps. We're going to skip the nun sound. we're going to put a shadda on the next letter, and then we're going to hold a ghunna. Again, this is the hardest rule. If you can master this, the other ones will come easy. It'll be easy with practice, though. Remember, it's not that it's hard, it's just that it's unfamiliar at first, right? So let's do an example here, right? So whenever we have one of these letters after a nun as-sakin or tanween, we're going to identify that it's this rule, and we're going to follow these steps, right? So here we have a nun as-sakina, right? We know because there's a nun that doesn't have anything on it. The next letter is a meme, which is check one of these letters, all right? So we're going to follow these steps. We're going to skip the nun sound, all right? So what I'm going to do is just write right here. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to skip the nun sound, right? We're going to skip this sound, okay? We're going to put a shadda on the next letter. Now you're going to see something really cool here. Oops, I'm going to actually share my screen again. One thing that you're going to see that's really cool is that this meme already has a shadda on it. So as we follow these steps, we're going to skip the nun sound. Now, again, the shadda is already there. That's step number 2. And the third step is to put a ghunna, meaning to hold for 2 counts. So I'm going to write the number 2 right there. I'm going to write the number 2 right here, just to remind us that we're going to hold that for 2 counts, all right? So this is what it's going to sound like. Mim mahisin, mim mahisin. Again, we skipped the nun sound, put a shadda on the next letter, and we did a ghunna. We held it for 2 counts, all right? Let's do another example. Here we have a nun as-sakina, a nun with nothing on it, right? So we can assume it has a sukun, all right? And the next letter is a waw. So we know that the rule that we follow is, because waw is one of these letters, is al-idgham with ghunna. We're going to skip the nun sound, all right? We're going to put a shadda on the next letter. Now, this time I have to actually imagine the shadda there. You notice for mim and nun, the shadda is already written there. So those are the easiest ones for al-idgham with ghunna. And then I'm going to write down a 2 because we're going to hold it for 2 counts, all right? So let's try it. Min waqin, min waqin. Remember, we are doing that ghunna. We're holding for 2 counts. Don't forget the ghunna. So many students forget this. Min waqin. All right, so we did some examples with al-idgham with nun as-sakina. But remember, these are the rules of nun as-sakina or tanween. So let's do some examples with tanween. Now, one thing I want to point out here is that for al-idgham, the al-idgham can only happen in between 2 words. What I mean by that is for all the other rules, you can have a nun as-sakin in the middle of a word and you'll still use that rule. But here, you notice the nun as-sakina has to be at the end of a word. So the al-idgham has to take place in the middle of 2 words, right? So here the nun as-sakina is at the end. If nun as-sakina is in the middle and we have one of these letters, we're not going to actually follow these rules, okay? So let's do another example with tanween. Here we have a dhammatain, in other words, a double dhamma, right? And the next letter is ya, all right? So we know that that's going to be one of the letters of idgham with ghunna, all right? So what we're going to do is we're going to erase or cancel out the noon sound. Now this says wujuhun. So you might be wondering, well, how do we cross out the noon sound? Well, there's a special easy strategy that you can use. Just cross out one of the double marks. Yeah, just cross out one of them. And then again, you're going to put a shadda on the next letter. And then remember, we're going to hold for 2 counts. So instead of wujuhun yawma idin, which is the way you would read it if this rule didn't exist, we're going to instead say wujuh. We're going to skip the noon sound. Hui, wujuhui. All right, we're going to put a shadda on the next letter. Wujuhui. And we're going to do a ghunna. All right. Wujuhui yawma idin. Okay, let's do another example just to solidify it in our minds here. Here we have a tanween, so it's a double mark. And then we have the letter waw after it. Now, waw is one of the letters of al-idgham with ghunna. So we're going to skip the noon sound. So remember, we're going to cross out one of the double marks. We're going to put a shadda right here, and we're going to hold for 2 counts. So here, we're going to say, instead of wawali din, we're going to say wawali din wa, wawali din wa, wawali din wa ma walada. All right, skip the noon sound. Good. Shadda on the next letter. And then ghunna, hold for 2 counts. Now again, remember, The easy ones for al-idgham with ghunna are the meme and the noon, because the shadda will already be there. For the ya and the waw, you have to remember to put that shadda in yourself. Now, as you practice, it's going to get easier, inshallah. All right, so now that we covered al-idgham with ghunna, remember there's two types of al-idgham. There's al-idgham with ghunna, and then there's al-idgham without ghunna. For al-idgham without ghunna, you might have already guessed this, but you follow the same rules, right? Except you don't do the last step, which is ghunna. Now, al-idgham with ghunna is only two letters. It's the lam and the ra. All right, now, so this is an easier rule because there's no ghunna here. All right, so let's do this example. Here we have a nun as-sakinah with a lam after it. We're going to skip the noon sound, shadda on the next letter. We don't do a ghunna, we don't hold. So it's going to be wala killa, wala killa. All right, let's do another example now with tanween. All right, so here we have dhammatain with the letter ra after it. All right, so we know that it's going to be al-idgham without ghunna. We're going to skip the noon sounds. Remember, we said the easiest way to do that is just to cross out one of the double marks, put a shadda on the next letter, and we don't hold it. Ghafurur, ghafurur rahimun. Right, it's that easy. If you master al-idgham with ghunna, al-idgham without ghunna becomes even easier. Now, the next two rules are a lot easier, you'll notice. The next rule only has one letter, and it's al-iqlab. Now, al-iqlab also has a huge hint to tell us that it is al-iqlab. First of all, al-iqlab is when you have the letter ba after a nun as-sakinah or a tanween. Now, the huge hint that we're going to use al-iqlab is you have this big floating meme. This floating meme right here. You can't miss it, right? You got this floating meme right here. Now, in case you forget that it's whenever there's a ba after a nun as-sakinah or a tanween, just remember you got a floating meme right here. How can you miss a floating meme? Where have you seen a floating meme before, right? So now with al-iqlab, what you're going to do is you're going to change the nun sound into a meme sound. All right, so whenever you have a ba after a nun as-sakinah or a tanween, all right, and again, you're going to have that floating meme, you're going to change the nun sound into a meme sound. Okay, and then you're going to do a ghunna. So we're going to say walakin ba'udat, walakin ba'udat. All right, so we change the noon sound to a meme and then do a ghunna. But let's do an example with tanween as well. All right, now normally when we look right here, normally this would be sami'un. And the big hint that it would be sami'un is that here next to the floating meme there's a haraka, which means that originally this was a double mark. This was a tanween. Notice here, there's no haraka next to the meme sound, which means you're just replacing a nun as-sakinah. But here you're replacing the noon sound of a tanween. Remember, an, ben, ten. You're only replacing the noon sound here. Now you're switching the noon sound to a meme sound. So instead of sami'un, it's going to be sami'um. And what are we going to do? We're going to hold for two counts. Sami'un basirun, as we have right here. Change the noon sound to a meme, and then do a ghunna, hold for two counts. Now, some scholars will tell you that you shouldn't close your lips entirely. Some will say it's okay to close your lips entirely. It's definitely easier to just close your lips. So, Sami'un basirun. All right, so that's iqlab. We've done two examples of that as well. It's a pretty easy rule. Al-ikhfa is a little bit more challenging, right? Now, an interesting thing about al-ikhfa is that al-ikhfa is all the leftover letters. All the remaining letters are going to fall into al-ikhfa. So we had the throat letters for al-idhar. We had ya, nun, mim, and waw for al-idgham with ghunna. You can also say yanmu, by the way, to help you remember. For al-idgham without ghunna, we had lam and ra. For al-iqlab, you only had ba. For al-ikhfa, you're going to have all the leftover letters. Now, the easiest thing to do is to memorize these letters for each rule. But for the last one, just remember, if it's not one of these, it's going to be one of these. All right? It's going to be part of al-ikhfa. Now, al-ikhfa is an interesting rule because it has one step, but it's a long step. What we're going to do with al-ikhfa is we're going to hide the noon sound with a ghunna while getting ready to say the next letter. Right? So let's do a couple examples here. All right, so here we have a nun as-sakinah, right? And then we have a dal after it. So dal isn't a letter of al-idhar. It's not a letter of al-idgham with ghunna. It's not a letter of al-idgham without ghunna. It's not the letter of al-iqlab. So it has to be ikhfa. So we're going to hide the noon sound. We're going to kind of say it, but we're going to hide it, right? So I'll kind of half cross it out, right? With a ghunna while holding it for 2 counts and getting ready to say the next letter. Now I'm going to demonstrate because that sounds really confusing at first. We're going to hide the noon sound with a ghunna while getting ready to say the next letter. So your mouth, while you're holding the noon sound, is going to be in the position to say the next letter. It's going to be in the position to say this letter. So it's going to sound like this. Tundirhum. Do you notice how my tongue is passing my teeth? Why? Because that is the position to say the letter dal. Tundirhum. All right. Now let's do an example with tanween. Here we have, if this rule were not there, what would have been malakun karimun. But remember, we're going to do al-ikhfa. We're going to hide the noon sound with a ghunna while getting ready to say the next letter. So I'm going to cross out one of the double marks. All right. Now remember, we're not going to cross it out all the way. There's still going to be a slight noon sound, but we're going to hide it. And we're going to hide it with a ghunna, 2 counts, while we get ready to say the next letter. And here the next letter is kaf. So we're going to say malakun karimun. Again, malakun karimun. And there you have it. There we have done examples for every single one of these rules. If you have questions, feel free to contact me or just leave a question right in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe as well. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.